Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. Okay, I am just beside myself for today's topic because it is one that so many of us have been having kind of in our own little circles. You know, we are seeing this anti-DEI rhetoric, anti-DEI legislation that is happening across the country, and so many of us are scratching our heads like, wait a minute, why is this even happening? Though many of us know why it's happening. And so we're actually going to unpack some of that why today with my guest, Dr. Melissa Crum. We are going to really talk about like what is happening. What is this boogeyman that is out there that is causing the fear in the hearts of so many people that think they know what's really going on? So I'm going to welcome our guest today, Dr. Melissa Crum. Welcome, Dr. Melissa. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
All right. So for folks who may not know who you are, can you give us a little bit of your background and how you got into this work?
Yeah. So I'm a diversity equity practitioner. I work with mission-driven organizations to help them build their workplace culture in a way that everyone gets to thrive. I started out in education, really helping museum educators as well as K-12 educators really think about linking real life experiences to learning opportunities and broadening their understanding of systems and institutions and identity. And I then was asked, hey, we're not a museum or we're not a school, but we would love for you to come to our nonprofit or our business to help us think through our workplace culture. And so then I got to expand to really support people to really think about what does it look like to be the kind of organization we say we want to be.
Absolutely. I love it. So, and I'm going to share with the audience, we almost had the show before the show. When we were prepping for this, because this is, what is happening right now is just mind blowing to me in some ways. In other ways, I'm like, you know what, this is the same old thing. Like these are the cyclical things that happen in this work. And for anyone that has kind of been a part of this show or watched us from the very beginning, one of my first guests was my cousin, my Aunt Lolly, who've been doing this work for 40 years. Right. And she talked about the battle scars of doing this. And so I think we're kind of going through that cycle of we're back on the battlefield. You have to really have your armor up, really know what you're talking about in this space. And, I started at the top talking about this boogeyman, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a fear that is taking shape or a narrative that has been created around the negative aspects of DEI. So can you talk to us a little bit about like, what are you thinking or what are you seeing when it comes to this anti-DEI rhetoric that is going on right now?
Yeah. So when I hear this anti-DEI rhetoric, what I find is that it's often grounded in fear and this assumption, this assumption that your comfort is supposed to be centered over my humanity. And so if I'm saying the things that you've been doing, the policies you've had, the rules you've had, the way of working has been harmful, instead of seeing it as what it is, how about we make this shift? You see it as an attack on you as an individual. You see it as someone calling you a problem. Right. And sometimes they're legitimately, some people are a problem. but
that part.
Sometimes it's actually like, hey, we should look at how we have this something that seems like as benign as a succession planning process, like how do people have access to opportunities, to things like how are we engaging with each other in ways that aren't necessarily relegated through policies, is more so practices. Those unspoken, unwritten rules that we find that can be harmful. And so oftentimes people don't like change. And so when you have people saying DEI becomes this change, I got to do something different. I can't speak the way I want to speak. I can't do everything that I've been able to do before. And that requires me to be different. I don't want to have to do that. But it sounds like at least to me, the folks who are having that pushback is that there hasn't been they haven't experienced a concerted effort where people are asking them to reconsider their perspective, reconsider the things that you've been told that are okay, that probably aren't actually okay.
Yeah. What's interesting is there's this narrative that those that are fighting back right now are disenfranchised. They are being disenfranchised by DEI, because what DEI is trying to do is level the playing field. And so there's this, but wait a minute, if you level the playing field, then I'm now not going to benefit. And I'm like, hello, this is the work that we've been trying to do, right? There have been populations of people that have been disenfranchised for centuries. And this work is really trying to, okay, how do we create opportunities? How do we remove barriers? How do we provide support so that everyone has an equal shot? And they are up at arms because they don't feel everyone needs to have an equal shot, but they can't say that because then that points the finger back at them for, so you are absolutely the problem. Right. So it's this narrative that has been twisted and manipulated to be this boogeyman of, DEI is racist. Well, let's go back a second because, again, when we were prepping for this and we started the whole show before the show, we were talking about the narrative now is DEI equals Black. Mm-hmm. Even more specifically, because of when you look at who's being targeted, DEI means Black women. Because I have never seen such an effort to disrupt, to put Black women back in their place than I've seen over the last few months. I read an article yesterday, day before, sometime recently, where after Dr. Gay at Harvard stepped down, there were more anonymous challenges put forth targeting 3 other Black women, PhDs at Harvard, saying that their work had been plagiarized. And I'm like, it's interesting because I'm not hearing them say that about any other group. And no one else is having to go through that same rigor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's this, I want to say it came out of Harvard. Don't quote me. There was this research that looked at how, depending on your race, how you're more likely to be scrutinized for your work and thus get disproportionate punishment. So African Americans tend to be more scrutinized for the same infractions that their white counterparts engaged in. And so if I'm hyper focused over here and I'm only looking over here, then I'm going to find what I'm looking at, right? Yep. So if these folks have actually plagiarized or have actually had some infractions, if I'm only looking at African Americans, then I'm going to find them. Yeah. What happens is that doesn't mean that no one else is doing it. And also because other people are doing it, that doesn't make it okay. But what it does is underline what is happening, which is an anti-Blackness. Yeah. Which is a misogynoir, which is a particular type of targeting. And so to me, it's not as helpful to say, well, then, just let's pretend that these folks aren't plagiarizing. And I don't know if they are, because I don't know if these folks actually did. But the point is, we should be looking at the strategies in which people are focusing on people. And what exactly are we saying with that? And I think folks aren't recognizing how that concerted effort is in and of itself the actual racism.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that whole thing, and again, I don't have a PhD because I'm like, oh, after 2 master's degrees, I'm good. But you do. So I will, put you as the expert on screen right now for this. But my understanding of the PhD process is it's known that there will be some slight, not necessarily plagiarisms, but there may be a misciting of a resource, something that is allowed as part of that process, because no one is absolutely perfect, right? And so what I am hearing or seeing about these attacks is it's just part of the normal process of a PhD process. It is not anything above and beyond what has been deemed appropriate or normal, right?
I don't want to say that it's allowed. Like, I don't want to say that,
right?
Oh yeah, so and so plagiarized. I don't want to say that. What I do want to say is it does happen, and it's the job of the reviewers, it's the job of the writer, it's the job of the folks who are doing the publishing, or those folks to really think this, of course the writer more so, to make sure that they're citing these ideas and these sources. So 100%. The thing is, Gay is not the first person to do that, and it seems like part of what DEI is in its purest form, I would argue, is trying to do is ensure that we have fair and equitable practices to ensure that everyone has access to success. And so when we shift the rules, where so-and-so's writing, I think it was Kevin Cruz, out of Princeton, I guess he got scrutinized for like plagiarism. What does it mean that this white man has been accused of plagiarism? And then how has that impacted his job or not? And I'm not anything for or against Cruz. It's who gets the media attention, who has the negative outcome, and why. And I think that's important for us to really look behind the curtain and see exactly how is this showing up. But I think this idea of kind of like the boogeyman, at the crux of it, I think one is anti-Blackness for sure, and also this idea that I'm not supposed to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I think what people don't realize is that is a part of the function of white supremacy.
Yeah.
And when we think of white supremacy, and I tell folks, we think about the extreme. Ku Klux Klan, Nazi, yes, they're included, but they're the extreme, right? What white supremacy and white supremacist patriarchy is really saying is, I get to control a host of things, including feelings. I don't get to be challenged because I'm the de facto power lead here. And so what DEI is, it is asking for an interrogation of power, and is requiring transparency. And white supremacy and power hides in opaque practices. It lives in the lack of transparency.
It lives in the shadows.
Absolutely lives in the shadows. And what DEI is saying is like, we're putting a light here. Yep. And so if we're going to use an example of like workplace, there's this phrase, occupational segregation, where if you're hired into an organization, and you know that it's understood that if you are hired in this department, there's going to be no career advancement if you're in this department. It's very difficult for you to rise the ranks. And so when I work with organizations, I say, do you have an org chart, a comprehensive org chart? And are people able to see, if I get hired in X, there's a clear path for me to get to VP or whatever, like a clear path? Or
Right.
is it something like, I need to know so-and-so. I need to make sure I attend the golf tournaments. I need to make sure I go to the happy hours because I got to rub elbows with this person. And
Yeah.
those are those unspoken, hidden in the shadows kinds of rules.
Yep.
And what DEI in its purest form is saying, no, you don't get to hire so-and-so because y'all are golf buddies, or because you know their dad, or because you just think they're a good person. In a similar, there's also research that tells us that white people disproportionately get hired based on potential, not their actual qualifications. And so when we talk about like affirmative action and these assumptions of diversity hire not really being hired by their qualifications, we don't realize that this happens all the time in white spaces. And it also assumes that just because you're a quote unquote diversity hire means that there's an assumption, again, anti-Blackness oftentimes, is that because you're diversity hire that you're automatically not qualified.
Right.
You can both be a person of color and highly qualified. And the research was sharing that this white person more likely will be hired because they're liked, because people think that they're great, because they think they have the potential to be a leader, or they have technical skills. Let's say they're really great at being in IT, or they're really great at whatever this technical ability is in whatever the function of their job.
Sometimes
and they
it's not even that.
Huh?
Sometimes it's not even that.
Sometimes it's not even that, but let's just say that they are, but they have no proof that they're actually able to lead people.
Yeah.
But when it comes to hiring the same person of color, a person of color in that same area, they have to have proven that they've got certification in this area. They've proved that they have managed a budget of this size. They've managed a team of this size. So they don't get the ability to oftentimes to be hired based on potential. Yeah. And there's inherently nothing incredibly wrong about potential. If there's room for growth, we get stretch projects. There's a whole framework for that. But what we don't often realize is there is an underlying anti-Blackness. There's an underlying sense of an eroding of control and power, specifically for those folks who are aligned with this kind of white supremacist patriarchy framework.
And it's interesting because it is so embedded in American corporate culture. I would just specifically say that, right? Like American corporate culture is seeped in this. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of a very specific situation that I was in where I was forced to hire someone who was a friend of an executive who had no experience in DEI, but they met at a yoga class and she needed a job. Once hired, she would then go back to that executive and say, well, I don't know what Sacha does. Well, if you don't understand DEI, of course you don't understand what I'm doing. Right. And so because of that, then it made it seem as if I didn't know that I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't doing any work. And it was just fascinating for me, the sociologist in me, right, to just watch this thing unfold. And yet you are a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, I'm like, you don't even understand the role that you play in upholding and uplifting these very systems that we are trying to dismantle. And so as you were speaking, like that very specific example came to me. But what I also want to make clear is people of color, Black people specifically, embody white supremacist culture and can be some of the worst gatekeepers out there, right? So when you talk about really dismantling and looking at this culture, it takes a lot to really do that because it is so inbred in who we are, how you're raised, especially in the U.S. Education system. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I am noticing right now, this is going to be a side conversation, but is the dismantling of education, right? Mm-hmm. So it's this built-in ignorance of our history, this built-in ignorance of systems, this built-in ignorance of how politics work. It's all by design, right? It's all by design. And it goes back to what you were saying around the work that happens in the corner, in the shadows. we can continue to uplift and uphold this system if you don't know that there's a system that's in place.
Absolutely. So that's why I try and tell folks when I talk about dismantling white supremacy, that doesn't inherently mean white people.
Right.
just the same way women uphold patriarchy.
Right.
Like there are women who will tell, there was this I was talking to a corporate leader, and as just like a mentor, almost like asking some questions, and he said, "Oh, you should really talk to my mentor, this other woman who's been doing DEI work forever." And we had a conversation about the work that I do and things like that. And she was like, "Well, just like I've been trying to tell these women in leadership, like you can't just wear anything that you want to wear and then assume that you're not going to be sexually harassed. That's on you. You should have changed you shouldn't wear that to work." And I was like, "What?"
Right.
What? My mind was blown. My mind was blown. And but see, that's the underlying thing of patriarchy, because what it says is you're not responsible for your behavior. I am.
Yep.
So I told my son is 18, but when he was younger, I don't know where he got this from, but it was like a high school dance. He was like, the girls were dancing like in a particular, whatever he thought was provocative kind of way. And he was like, they're dancing like they were asking for what, sir? Asking for what? I was like, this is not my child saying this. Asking for what? I said, this girl can cartwheel naked, and she's not asking for anything except to cartwheel naked. Now, am I advocating to do that? No. Right. But you, sir, that does not mean you aren't responsible for your behavior. And so the way power, and oftentimes these kind of particular forms of power, mean that you are responsible for my behavior. I'm not responsible for my behavior. So you need to change your actions so that I can do what I want to do. So now sexual harassment is not the harasser's fault. It's your fault for like
how are you dressed?
Because of how you dress. Yeah. And it's like, that makes sense. That is upholding patriarchy. And so DEI is like, no. You're responsible for your actions, and you don't get to just do this because you want to.
So, I mean, I tell you, you say things and it's just like, yes, that. Because I'm looking at like what's going on now with this whole anti-abortion, all of the things that are happening. And I was sitting in our family room a couple weeks ago, and the news was on talking about what was happening in Alabama. And I'm just irritated by the whole thing. So they go to commercial break. The very next commercial was one about how you could get generic Viagra for pennies on the dollar. And I'm just like, really? Like, no one sees the connection here of I'm going to mandate what a woman can do with her body because I have that power. But at the same time, I'm going to give you free access to something that is medically not necessary just because you want to have it. So you could do whatever the hell you want to do whenever you want to do it. Right? Because it's like, it's convenient to put in your wallet. The marketer in me was just like, no one is seeing this connection. Is it just me? And so that's exactly what it is. That is how the patriarchy, that is how this control and power gets seeped into our culture, because we don't even necessarily see or understand what it looks like, the tenets of the culture.
Yeah, we hear these big words like patriarchy, feminism, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets tagged on it, and CRT, and you're like, did we actually read? Like, did we actually read something like a grounding text on any of these things? Yeah. And so, but what I find was interesting with Alabama and the IVF, is that it started to change when white affluent women were like, wait a minute, this is impacting me. And it's like, let's walk this back. Now we're in the middle of trying to get pregnant. Me and our conservative or not, or high income, whatever, we're getting impacted by this. Now we want to walk it back. So it's interesting how the narrative shifts based on who it impacts.
But it's very interesting because I'm like, I can't remember what the statistics were, but like 86% of women in Alabama voted for this, and they didn't even necessarily know what they vote for, right? So it goes back to not understanding the systems and the miseducation of how civics works and how elections have impact. All of that's been taken out of schools. And so when you think of, again, this power that is in place and how the ignorance is built in, and not calling people stupid, but just ignorant to facts. It's all part of this larger system of, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize that that's what that meant when you wanted me to do X, Y, and Z. And so as we, look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, to your point, it really is about like, no, let's shine a light, let's educate, let's help people connect the dots on so many of these things. I've used the example before where I was facilitating a program and this older, white gentleman was there, arms crossed, and you could tell he was just, anything that I was saying was not going to land. We were talking about privilege. And I used the example of me being able-bodied. And I was like, the privilege of being able-bodied and the things that I don't have to think about or navigate because of that. And when I said that, it clicked for him because he was just like, my wife is in a wheelchair and we just went to Disney. And though we had a wonderful experience, we had to navigate Disney in a different way because of where they have access points. And I'm like, someone who's able-bodied doesn't even have to think about that. They don't even have to consider those access points, right? But because you are with someone that you love and this is how they have to navigate, it is front and center for you. So imagine if somebody else had some other aspect of privilege that you didn't necessarily have, right? And so it clicked for him in that moment. I don't know if he got the bigger picture, but it's those situations where we have to understand that DEI is about shining a light into, sometimes people have access to things that we don't necessarily have access to, or just because we are in the same place doesn't mean that we got there the same way.
100%. And it's so interesting. I tell folks there's two different kinds of ignorance. There's an ignorance that you don't know, and there's an ignorance that you don't care. And so there's what hides in those shadows where power and oftentimes oppression lives is ignorance.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not learning, if I'm not shining a light in those spaces, then all the things that hide in that dark place will continue to cause harm. And so what happens, this idea of a boogeyman, when we think of boogeyman, we think of ghosts, we think of the dark, we think of shadows. Yep. And so when folks are like the DEI boogeyman, how do you defeat the boogeyman? You shine a light on it. Like, what do you do when you were a kid when you thought it was a ghost? You turned the light on.
And slept with the lights on.
And so what happens, what I'm finding is that people, what happens with, especially in kind of conservative or anti-DEI rhetoric, is that you don't question the dark or the potential boogeyman. You are criticizing the flashlight.
The light, yeah.
CRT is a flashlight.
Yeah.
CRT is a way of thinking about systems and pushing through it and understanding how oppression works within systems and institutions. And if we see it as that, if we see it as a tool, then it can help us understand all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And even the things that some folks, like, I'm from a rural South. That's where I'm from. And even right now I live in Ohio, and it has definitely large conservative pockets in both of those places. And when people hear about privilege, when I hear pushback, particularly from white people that say, well, I'm not privileged. I didn't grow up poor. I grew up poor. I grew up in this rural place that didn't have access, or we had X amount of challenges. And first I say, one, what I want us to think about is, did you grow up poor because you were white? Was your poverty because of your whiteness? Or was it because of other things?
Yep.
In these other systems of like, not, for example, not having adequate healthcare facilities in the rural spaces. That is a DEI problem.
Jobs, right? Access, right?
Geography is within the scope of inclusion and equitable access.
Yep.
But because the way you get those hospitals, that healthcare access, the way your political advocates have framed it as like federal welfare in order to get Medicaid, Medicare, these other types of access, you then vote it down because someone told you that it's like wait a minute, did you read, like did you see
I was about to say something that was a curse word, but it's a mind screw, right? Like it's because that's what it is. It's because there's the connotation of welfare queens goes back to the 80s, right? Those are Black women, not necessarily seeing that I'm in a dire strait that requires me to need welfare. So to your point, they vote against themselves.
And it's like, actually in this case, and in many cases, DEI would help you. Inclusion, equitable policies and practices would help you. You would get access to quality physicians in a hospital and all of these things. You would get quality roles in schools. And because the way right now, the way we fund public schools, at least it's been ruled at least twice in Ohio as unconstitutional. The way we fund public schools through property taxes, and of course, your value of your property,
redlining and all,
redlining, right? And the value of your property can fluctuate all over the place. You can have the same house in a majority white neighborhood. That value is different from majority Black neighborhood, but that value has a lot to do with your property taxes, which has a lot to do with how that's funded. The school is funded. So if your property is valued lower in this rural area, and that means your schools are underfunded, that is an inequitable practice. DEI could help you. I was shining a light in how these things are running, but it's like, no, my anti-Blackness is so strong that I'm willing to harm myself in the practice.
Yeah. Dr. Melissa, we can go on for days on this, and we might have to do a part 2, a part 3. I might just have to have you as a regular guest, because this is a topic that I think there's just so much to unpack. And there's not enough time. And I think it's like we're at a mission critical point because people just don't know what they don't know and understand that it's all by design. The fact that you don't know is by design. So I want to ask you, because, we need to, oh, Lord, I don't want to wrap this up. But, so what do you do to take care of yourself? Like, what are the things? Because, child, this stuff is stressful. And especially what's going on right now, self-care is top of my priority list. So what are the things you do to take care of you?
Yeah, I refuel with, I would say, first, things that are mindless. So whether that's like mindless Netflix watching and binge watching Love is Blind, something like that. But I also find it really helpful to be around like-minded folks who can ultimately kind of love on me in particular kinds of ways, that understand the challenges that that I am and people like me are experiencing. And so being in spaces where that kind of love is happening, but also in the spaces in the absence of some of these oppressive constructs are helpful. So when I say it's not completely absent, but for example, every year some friends of ours, we would go to Essence Fest, where it's like this is a sea of Black people, like just be, and in those moments, we're only focusing on the things that make us happy, the things that bring us joy. And whenever I can recreate those kinds of shared spaces, I try and do that as much as possible.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we have a jazz festival here that we go to every year with our friends. And it's just like, all right, 3 days, we're just music and food and a little bit of sleeping. Right?
And maybe some margaritas.
Yes, that too. So, if folks wanted to get in contact with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So my name is Melissa Crum, and also MosaicEducationNetwork.com. You can sign up for a newsletter. I give you tips and information every 2 weeks if you sign up for a newsletter. So love to see you in your inbox.
Yay. Dr. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation. I mean, yeah, there's just so much more that we can talk about. So thank you so very much. And thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope that you were able to walk away with some nuggets of information and stuff that you can share with others that are in your friends and family list that may be anti-DEI and, something here that they could just sit and noodle on for a bit. So be sure to like, share, subscribe. We are here every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern. And until next time, have a good one.